Hi there, it's Henry here from EWI Store. Just going to come today and talk a little bit about choosing your render. So if you're a homeowner and you're wondering what top coat to use or what render to use or how you want your property to look like at the end of the project, there are a few different things that you need to consider. Now, colour is one that everyone jumps to straight away. They say, right, I want an ivory top coat, I want an ivory render, whatever. Or, you know, a pink one or something like that. But importantly, you need to look at the build-up first. You need to look at what's actually going onto the wall, besides just colour. So there are a couple of different options. The more traditional way is just a sand cement, very basic sand cement with just a painted top coat. That is very heavy maintenance. So after a couple of years, you're going to need to paint that again. Any movement in the substrate is going to come through and show us as cracks on the surface. So that's not something that we terribly recommend, really. The next one is what people sometimes refer to as a K-Rend finish, although K-Rend is a brand, much like EWI Pro. But it's a monokoosh. It's a scratch coat, basically a one coat system. So all you're applying there is you're applying one bag up to kind of 19 millimeters in 2 passes and then scratching it back basically to 15. And that scratching back causes, forms a kind of chalky finish, almost like a kind of sandstony finish, which looks great. It's very natural. There are limitations to it. Because it's one product, there's not the kind of flexibility of the other, you know, of a silicone thin coat system, which we'll move on to. Any movement in the substrate tends to kind of come through, and you do get these feather line cracks coming up, especially from pressure points around windows and that sort of thing. The next kind of render system that you see is often what people refer to as a thin coat system. So a silicone thin coat or an acrylic thin coat system. Now this is a bit different from the sand cement and the monokoosh in that it's made up of different layers. So you've got a base coat layer with a fiberglass mesh embedded into that. You're then smoothing that over, perhaps with another thin pass of the base coat. You're then priming this and then applying a very thin top coat, which is through colored itself. Comes in tubs, and that is, you know, pigments added to those tubs, mixed up, and they have a grain to it. So that's then applied to that, and it gives, you know, you can get different sizes of grain. So you can have a 1 millimeter, which is quite a smooth, you know, texture, all the way up to a 3 millimeter, which gives it a slightly rougher texture. Not quite as rough as kind of your painted pebble dash, but along the right kind of lines. The most popular one that we see is a 1.5 millimeter, which is shown here. So it's a kind of bit of texture there. But importantly with the silicone thin coat is that because you've got these layers, these flexible layers, any movement within the substrate behind, so if you're, you know, especially on timber frame and you've got different rates of contraction and expansion, you know, that is not going to come through to the top coat. So that will be soaked up basically. All that movement will be soaked up within that base coat and mesh layer and won't come through and show on the top coat. So within the silicone thin coat system, once you've done your kind of base coat and mesh layer and primer, you've then got the choice of a few top coats, still ignoring colors for the time being, but you've got the kind of entry model of acrylic, which isn't terribly breathable at all. A high kind of acrylic content means that you're almost wrapping your property in a kind of polythene bag, so it's not going to let moisture out. It is the entry model. But as soon as you go into the silicones, so Silicone Silicate, that becomes breathable, very flexible, but doesn't quite have the full self-cleaning properties. You know, it will still last a lot longer than your painted sand cement or your monokoosh in terms of looking clean and fresh. But if you're really wanting something that is maintenance free, you should look at your full silicone or your premium biosilicone. So they are where you look into the hydrophobic properties. So basically, while water forms large globules on the top coat itself, and that is then, you know, drops straight off. So premium bio, that is where you know, if you live in an area of high vegetation or on coastal areas, you get a bit of algae buildup. That's just going to wash straight off, and it's a really good kind of self-cleaning property to the top coat. Once you've looked at that and you're comfortable with the top coat, you know, your silicone, if you decided to go for your Silicone Silicate thin coat top coat, or your premium bio because you live on a farmland, you know, on a farmyard or something like that, and you want to keep it fresh, then you can look at colors. So I've got a Koosh color chart here, which I explained about before. Fairly limited. It comes in bags, so you can't add pigment to that. You know, we can't add any pigment to that. That is how it comes. So a fairly limited color option there. But the good thing is when you look at the silicone thin coat is you have got an absolute, you know, endless choice of colors here. So as they come in the tubs, all we do is we add pigment to it to match any kind of color. We have our own color charts here, but that gives you a massive amount of choice there. So then we would step back, leave it to you, and see how it finishes. But there you go.